Hey guys, Andrey is here. In this video, I'm going to show you two common traps in the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez. So let's start with e4, e5, knight goes to f3, knight goes to c6, bishop goes to b5, entering the Ruy Lopez. Now black responds with the a6, bishop captures c6, so it's the first move of the exchanged variation. Pawn captures here, white castles. And black plays f6. So it is the most popular continuation, protecting the pawn on e5, as we have discussed in the previous video. White continues with the normal d4, black captures on d4, knight captures on d4, and as we have discussed in the previous video, black usually plays c5 with the pawn to attack the knight and to exchange queens, maybe get some extra space on the queen side, and so on. But what if bishop goes to c5 to attack the knight, combining it with the development of the bishop? So here is our first trap. This move loses immediately after a simple queen to h5 check. So after this move, both the king and the bishop are hanging, and unfortunately for black, there is no chance to counterattack or save the material. So after g6, queen captures on c5, and it's basically over because knight on d4 is protected, so black cannot regain the material. Even something like b6 is not possible because c6 is under pressure. So what is the point behind this thing? So whenever you play a pawn move like f6 or anything else, you have to understand what is being weakened, because literally any pawn move in chess weakens something. In this particular case, f6 is very good, very solid defense of the e5 pawn, but it weakens h5, e8 diagonal, making your king vulnerable to check on h5. And after d4 and e takes d4 followed by knight takes d4, this check is actually possible. So now queen has the access to h5 square, which means you have to be very careful now. What is the reason black makes sometimes this move bishop to c5? I guess the main reason is exactly this. So black is too focused on the advantages of the move f6, then black is too focused on the advantages of the bishop to c5, forgetting about disadvantages of the own position. So this diagonal is vulnerable and black has to be very careful. Simple check on h5 without the attack along the fifth rank is actually not so dangerous. So for example, if black plays normal move c5, pawn is protected, as you can see, and queen to h5 gives white literally nothing. So black responds with the g6, and well, this weakening is not critical and white doesn't have a follow-up to the attack. Basically, after this move, white is in trouble because the queen and the knight are hanging. So don't play bishop to c5. Now let's get to another trap. So back to the position after white's castling. As I mentioned in the previous video, black has numerous ways to protect e5 pawn. We have discussed only two popular ones. But one of the interesting alternatives is actually queen to f6 move. What's the point here? Well, we actually prepare castling long in this situation. So our ideal setup here is to put the bishop on g4 at some point and then to castle quickly, starting the attack on the king side. So white may respond with different moves. One of the most straightforward is just to play d4. After e captures d4, bishop goes to g5 with a tempo, also controlling d8 square, so it may be dangerous for black to leave the d file now. That's why the main theoretic move here is queen to d6. And now white has a choice between taking on d4 with the knight or with the queen. Sometimes white tries to force black to exchange queens with the help of queen captures d4. Here, black may take on d4 immediately. I think there is nothing wrong with that. In many cases, we may reach the position from the main line with some additional moves like bishop d7, f6 maybe, and so on. But the other approach here for black is to try to wait before white captures on d6 himself. Because in that case, we may combine the exchange with, improving the position of our bishop, for example. So after bishop d7, white is also waiting, developing the piece to c3. Black plays knight to e7, very flexible move. From here, the knight may go to g6, but another idea is just to cover diagonal h4, d8, and to prepare castling long. And what if white just decides to keep queens on the board? So after queen e3, queens are on the board, and now black has to be very careful. The most logical continuation, though, is castling long, isn't it? But it's wrong completely, because now, all of a sudden, queen jumps to a7, and black is immediately lost, because there is a threat of queen a8 checkmate. The only way to prevent it is to move the bishop somewhere from d7, let's say, to g4, to have this d7 square for a king. But white has a very simple rook to d1 move, attacking the queen, and once the queen goes away, somewhere d7 is controlled and queen a8 is again a checkmate. So white is winning a lot of material here. The thing here is that castling long actually doesn't cover a7 square. So that's the big difference between castling long and castling short. So when you castle short, let's say, the king covers all the squares around it. When you castle long, one square is always vulnerable. So that's the main reason why benefits from it here, because queen has the access to that square. So how to prevent it? Well, basically, whenever you still have queens on the board and going to make castling, make sure there is no queen a7, or at least it is not fatal, because sometimes it's possible that this queen doesn't lead to a checkmate. For instance, imagine the situation when you have a counterattack on the king side already, and you have some ways to cover your king, even bring it to the center, then it may be okay. But you should always think about it prior to making castling. Otherwise, you may be simply outplayed like that. By the way, this line is taken from my games against a grandmaster. Well, it was a blitz game, but nevertheless, the grandmaster was pretty strong. So even the best may fall into this trap. It's pretty common. And it may happen, obviously, not exactly in this line, but in literally any line featuring the queen on this diagonal and castling long. So how to improve black's play here? I would say that at some point it was just safer to take the queen, exchange these guys, and get to pretty typical endgame from the exchanged variation. All right, I hope you enjoyed the video and got some useful information. See you next videos.